안녕하세요, 여러분. 저는 이노베이터 박스의 대표 모니카 강이고요. 여러분은 지금 Dear Workplace by Innovators Box가 하는 팟캐스트를 지금 듣고 있습니다. 제가 한국말 하는 걸 듣고 있나요? Welcome to Dear Workplace by Innovators Box. I'm your host, Monica Kang, and you are right. I just spoke Korean at the very beginning. In case you haven't known, I am also a proud Korean American and bilingual. I grew up partially in South Korea during my teenage years, was born in Washington, D.C., so was born in the States, but having lived and grown up in two cultures has always led me to ask, how do I define who I am and make sense of the two cultures? And it's been kind of cool lately. To be honest, we are seeing a thrive of K-culture everywhere. K-food, K-drama, K-music, K-TV show, K-everything. And I thought, why don't I dive deeper into this? What does it feel for others in the workplace to be a Korean American who happen to be doing businesses related to Korean culture? How does it feel to see Korean culture thriving, and what does it really mean for them? So, for the next few weeks, we are going to fall in love in Korea culture and invite you to get a chance to see from their lens what it means to be Korean American and how it's influencing how we show up in our society and more. Our first guest today is probably better known by her artist name, Kimchi Juice. That's right. She is a Washington, D.C. based artist and muralist, Julia Chon, who explores the relationship between cultural tradition and its effects on generational identity and decisions Asian Americans make to form their identities. With a prominent Korean aesthetic in each piece, she emerges her ancestry and traditions with the contemporary to convey the nuances of the Korean diaspora. You might have noticed her many work that she has exhibited in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, New York, and even Minneapolis. Her collaborations and clients include NASA, Apple, the Korean Cultural Center, and the Phillips Collection. One of the things I was deeply inspired was how very early on she had clarity in that she wanted to pursue art and proactively sought out it. First, seeking her parents' permission to see if she can get homeschooled so that she can devote her time into art. A permission that not a lot of Korean parents would have given. So you dive into it a little bit more, why and how that all got started, and how even with her most recent work with the James Beard Award-winning chef and Kim's new Korean American restaurant Kim's in Minnesota, how she got to do the mural work there. So let's dive into it. Meet Julia, Kimchi Juice. Welcome to Dear Workplace. I am so excited to have Julia Chon on the show today, better known by her artist name, Kimchi Juice. And not a coincidence because it is implying all the amazing work that she does related to Korean culture and celebrating diversity and all that beauty. So Julia, so excited to have you. I think the first question I am so eager to dive in is how in the world did you get to dive into a career as an artist, and why pay so much homage to Korean culture and history?
Yeah, so thank you for having me first off. I think that it really starts at the beginning. I was born into a huge Korean family. My grandmother had 7 daughters, and the reason why she had 7 daughters was because there were no sons. And culturally, they kept trying to have a son. And so I was so blessed to have my mother and 6 aunts growing up surrounding me. And I was always a creative child growing up. But when I was around 13, 14, my parents were separating and getting divorced. And I really turned to art and particularly painting as therapy for me. And so it was something that I practiced every day. And at some point in 8th grade, I told my mom, I was like, I think I want to be an artist as a career. And to be an artist, I can't go to a regular high school. I won't have time to paint. And so I asked her to homeschool me. And she was completely shocked by this question. No one in our family has been homeschooled or, had alternative learning. And so she was like, one, I'm never gonna homeschool you. I'm not a teacher, but if you find an alternative, we can discuss. And so I found an online high school program after some research, and I proposed it to both of my parents. And miraculously, they both agreed to me trying out this online high school program. And that's really how I got my start as an artist. I began learning and teaching myself. And by the time I was 16, I started exhibiting work.
That's amazing. And have to thank your parents for having the wisdom to let you flourish early on. I think what's so incredible is that you had an early awareness, not only seeing that, hey, I want to see art as how it could give me healing, but actually seeing that, wait, I think I want to pursue this as a career. And I think it's very rare that some of us have that clarity early on. I'm curious what helped you have that clarity, because it could be something that you can just continue to enjoy, but it's another thing to know that I want to do this professionally.
I've turned 24 next week, and so it's pretty much 10 years since I made that decision. And I think looking back, it's hard to pinpoint how I came to that conclusion. It was almost like one day I woke up and I was like, oh, this is the path for me. And so I just feel really lucky and fortunate that I was able to come to that decision being 14. And also reflecting on it, it's like if I had a child that came to me and was like, this is what I want to do, as a parent, I would be not sure, I'd be like, oh, really? And having to have that trust. So I'm so grateful and fortunate that my parents were also willing to let me take my future into my own hands.
So wonderful and powerful. When I revisit also your artistic style, I've noticed a lot of it have those two elements, which is sharing Korean culture, but also a lot of bright color, which I absolutely love. Tell me a little bit more. Why is sharing Korean culture through your artwork important for you?
Yeah, I touched a little bit on how I come from a large matriarchal Korean family. And I think when I first started painting, it was what I gravitated towards, especially I came from a 3-generation traditional Korean household where it was my grandparents, my mom, me, and my brothers, all sandwiched in a house together. And so I had this access to this wealth of information on what it was to be Korean in the 60s and 70s for my grandparents. And so the first painting that I did, the first portrait that I did was of my grandmother, referenced off of old family photos. And so it wasn't really even a question on it was just something that was natural and innate, wanting to express this side of me that I don't think I could express with words. And my grandfather always says to paint with joy and bright colors and yellow make me happy. And so that kind of all factors in the love for my family, for who I am, and just being able to put that on a canvas.
I love that. And I've heard that, in fact, that energy was also how you got the inspiration during the pandemic to create your kimchi pot special collection that is also now at the Smithsonian. Tell me a little bit more about that journey. Where did you first find the inspiration?
Yeah, so for the kimchi pots, the Smithsonian acquisition came about when a researcher approached me researching APA foodways in the DC area. And so we're talking about, originally it was an oral history interview that I contributed on being Korean American in this day and age. And then when I started talking about the kimchi pots, he was like, oh, yes, please. The painting on the pots was something that I really wanted to do as a series. And right now I'm working on 53 ongi pots, which represent each year that my family has lived in the United States since immigrating in 1970.
One of the things I am very inspired in your style is there's one thing to just say, hey, I come from Korean culture, I want to do art related to Korea, but you have a very unique way of telling your story through your artworks, whether it's the murals or the kimchi pots, even the concept that you just mentioned of, hey, I'm working on a next series that's highlighting the 53 years of journey. I'm so inspired how you find these ideas and then execute it. So I'm curious if you can walk us through, where do you find those? and decide which one to pursue? Because I'm sure you have many more ideas and filter.
Oh, I have too many ideas. It's hard to select which one to pursue, but I think that over the pandemic, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and they're going to be 87 and 84 this year. And so I think there's this reality that, time is finite, and to treasure these moments, but also like try and gather and document as much information about our family history as possible. And so over the pandemic, I started the Korean Archives, which is a digital photo archive dedicated to preserving generally 20th century Korean and Korean diasporic stories. And so I've been very lucky to have found this community and for this group of people that have contributed from around the world, documenting stories of migration that I wouldn't have heard of otherwise, like Koreans that immigrated to South America and Germany. And, I think when we live in the US as Korean Americans, that is what we know and are used to. But to realize that there's so much that's untold and not necessarily understood, I think it's so important for us to connect over what it is to be Korean outside of Korea. And so with those thoughts in mind, which I think is the motivation behind a lot of my work, is like this preservation of history or this kind of aspect of storytelling, the ongi pots were really my way of carrying these memories that we forget along the way. I was talking to my grandfather a little while ago, and he was telling me about how he was one of 5 siblings and he had an older brother that passed away when he was a toddler, I think from pneumonia. And I asked my grandfather, I was like, "Oh, what was your brother's name?" And he said, "Oh, I can't remember." And I just remember feeling so moved by my grandfather doesn't remember his brother's name, and that's no fault of his own. But in turn, I will never know what his brother's name is. And so to carry these lost memories through my work, these memories that are with us that we will never be able to verbalize, I think is so important. And I think ultimately that's what represents the Kimchi Pot Project, what represents a lot of the work that I do and try to do moving forward.
I almost feel like I'm hearing you're not just an artist, you're almost a historian, archiving and making sure we remember the history and giving it the proper credit. Your story about your grandfather and forgetting the name, that's moving. And I think there's such a human element that you have beautifully captured and have beautifully recommunicated back through the work. I also assume, as you have mentioned, there's a lot of work that happens to execute that. Tell me, for instance, when you do the potteries, I would assume as any artist, there's okay, I think this is going to work this way, but it might not work out. So what do you do if there are mistake versions that you go through that you have to repaint or redo? What has been your creative process, or the first vision you have? Do you feel like you can just flesh it out? So I think as an artist, and when we hear about it, we're always curious about do they somehow magically just do it in one go? Tell me a little bit more about how it has been for you.
Yeah, so with the ongi pots, it's a lot of thinking about it because it is such an expansive project that I will get overwhelmed by my own ideas. So I'll just be like, oh, do I really want to work on this for so many years? But how I approach the kimchi pots is very different from how I approach studio work. Generally, I'll be sketching out and going through a lot of revisions of what my ultimate goal is to be visualized. With the ongi, usually I'm painting very small flowers on them, and those are all freehand, so I don't really have a plan when I go, and I generally have a concept. A couple months ago, I dreamt of a ongi just covered in ginkgo leaves, and I woke up and I was like, oh, I have to paint that now because it came to me in a dream. And so in some ways the process materializes as a vision very unexpectedly, but usually there's a lot of planning. I like to plan, I like to be prepared, and so it's just different ways that how I am generally as a person manifests in how I execute my work.
What about some of your mural projects? You've done in so many locations, DC, Minnesota, Korea, just to name a few, and they're huge. I've seen some of them. I'm like, how in the world did Julia actually create this? And so I'm curious because I assume that doesn't take many days, and you have to also contingent upon weather conditions. What are some things that people don't realize?
Yeah, and so kind of like around the same time that I started showing my work when I was 16, a year later, I painted my first mural for a mural festival in DC called DC Walls. And that was like my first time painting large scale mural. It was 132 feet long and about like 10 feet tall. And so I think it was really like jumping into the fire and figuring stuff out. And I'm very lucky that the mural street art community usually will all come together and it's this beautiful like sharing of information, and like so many people taught me stuff that I would have never known. And I think also the rush of painting large scale, the thrill you get from it stays with you. And after that, you just want to keep painting more. And so after painting my first wall, I was like, oh, this is what I really want to do. And so when approaching the murals, it's very different because you're working in public. Whoever walks by is like interacting with your work. And I think the beauty of being able to share my story through my art and realizing that it's not just for me, it's for the people that see it every day, the people that come into the area is so important.
Do you have a wish list of like, these are places I would like to get a chance to create a mural?
I don't necessarily have a wish list of places where I would want to paint. I think it's more like a wish list of people that I would want to work with. I think over the last several years of doing this, the projects that are most meaningful to me are when I'm able to partner with somebody that's like deeply involved within their community and be able to create something beautiful and tell my story, but also their story. And so with the wall in Minneapolis, that was probably the largest wall of my career. And I got to work with Van Kim, who's a chef there. She was featured on Netflix's Chef's Table for the pizza season. Just to see what she has done within her community and to like see how her staff respect her so much. It was just such a meaningful project, especially coming to Minnesota where there isn't a huge Korean American population. It was like, oh, like, this is really significant for the people that will resonate with this and like something very meaningful. And so I want to paint everywhere. I love to paint walls, but when it's with really good people, that's what makes me like want to keep going.
How long did that particular one take, for instance?
Oh, that took about, I think it was 8 painting days. I think to address your weather question, it rained for 2 of those days, so I couldn't work. We were a little bit behind schedule, but it's pretty much sun up to sundown. And even beyond that, we ended up buying lights and like painting like really late into the night to meet the deadline. And so it was very strenuous. I think when people see murals, you see the end product versus how physically demanding it is to be like working standing or like going up and down ladders and like trying to put this up. And so it was definitely a tough wall. It tested me.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the reason why I wanted to follow up and ask, because I think we don't know and learn about the depth of the challenges that goes and the care that goes behind it. So thank you for sharing that. Following up on your insight in how you're hoping to do more artwork, not just to document history, to highlight the meanings, but really celebrating those people's stories. I'm curious, taking a step back as we visit the Korean culture overall, how are you feeling about how people are seeing Korean culture lately?
Yeah, I mean, I think that growing up being Korean wasn't like, I don't know if it's like cool or it just wasn't, part of the cultural landscape that it is today. And so I think seeing the wave that's happened over the last few years, the last decade, where it's like K-dramas, K-pop, I just think it's crazy to like see this aspect of Korean culture be embraced by like so many people. I definitely think that it's not necessarily representative of, for me, what it is to be Korean American. It reflects one very like niche product of Korea. I'm glad that people through that take interest in our history and our culture. But then I see like this, this generation of Korean American artists, and I see like what so many of us have to offer in terms of this narrative. And I think that's what's so important to me, to like see our stories being told in a way that is accurate and representative.
That's so true. What's something that you wish others understood better about Korean and Korean culture and not be misunderstood?
That's a tough question. I think it's more that we're not a monolith. And that might be like the most obvious answer to give, but we're all so vastly different. I think Koreans that migrated away from Korea are very different from Koreans that live in Korea, and Koreans that are multiracial, and Koreans that are adoptees. Like, we have this heritage that connects us all together, but at the same time, we have vastly different experiences. We make up a very diverse group of people. And I think it's important to keep in mind and respect that.
On a related note, some quick rapid fire Korea related questions just to say some insight. Favorite Korean food?
Oh my goodness.
If you have to pick one.
I've been eating a lot of sundubu lately. It's the weather, so I think that would be my answer for now. But it's so hard to pick just one.
Favorite Korean word?
진짜.
Why? Why is 진짜? And for those who don't know what 진짜 means, how would you explain it?
It means really? It's just like, it runs through my head a lot where I'm just like, 진짜. But then with my grandparents, like I picked up 아이고 like a lot. Like just hearing my grandparents like go up and down the stairs and be like, 아이고. And so maybe those are my two favorite words.
And favorite Korean history or fact?
Maybe it's related to my grandfather, but I remember talking to him and he was like, oh yeah, when I was younger, I was supposed to go to Germany to be a part of the group of miners that the German and Korean government were exchanging.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And he was talking about this and I was like, oh, you were supposed to go, but you didn't. So like what happened? He was like, well, they gave me a medical exam and my back was too weak. And I was just like, oh, like that was so interesting. It was like my first introduction to like that wave of migration that happened and that aspect of history.
Yeah.
And like he was almost a part of it. But then he was like, my back was too weak. And that's what stopped me from going. And that's how like I ended up marrying your grandmother. And our whole like history, like, was able to grow because of
wow.
him having a bad back, which I inherited.
Oh, and you could have been Korean German, but that's how you became Korean American.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What a detail. That's so powerful. If somebody wanted to go to Korea for the first time, what should they do or where should they go? What tip would you share?
Oh my goodness. I would say get out of Seoul. Seoul is a beautiful aspect of Korea, but like just get on the train and go anywhere. When I went back in 2019, it was my first time going as an adult, and I met up with my friend and her family's from Daegu, and we ended up spending a few days there. And I was just like, this like nostalgic memory of what Korea was from when I was 5 and 6. Daegu like summarized that for me. When I arrived in Seoul in 2019, I was like, I don't remember there being so many like LED screens. I was like, it's so different. So yeah, I just travel and experience it for all it is.
And for those who are like, I want to go to Korea, but I can't, what's a taste of Korea they can get in, let's say, the greater DC area where we are at?
Yeah, I think that the Annandale is the obvious, like, little taste of Korea, especially if you want to eat. But I think the Korean Cultural Center does so many great programs, especially for people that are, like, want to experience Korean culture. They have art exhibitions, they do, like, community activations. And so I really like what they're doing for, like, the broader community. And I think it's really special to see so many people gather together.
Love it. Love it. Thank you for indulging me in that little rapid Q&A for the Korean culture. I think it'll be a little fun to see all our other Korean leaders and how they are engaging with Korean culture. So thank you for indulging me on that. Going back to the macro theme, I loved your reminder about what we can do better about recognizing about Korean culture, Korean American culture, how Korean Asian culture is all different in all the different regions, as you've said, and hence your journey and passion to devoting to documenting those stories and representations. Anything else that you wish others could look out for you also in your continued artist journey?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me at kimchi.juice on Instagram. That's where I'm the most active and post my art. But if you are listening to this and you would like to submit your family's photos and stories, the Korean Archives is always open for submissions. I'm so touched by everybody that contributes. And I think that it's really important to recognize the importance of our own family's journeys and to document that so that, we can continue to preserve this history that unfortunately does die out as people age. And I just love seeing people's very stylish grandparents. I love to hear all these deeply moving stories that come out of this. And yeah, just please feel free to submit.
I love it. I feel like I need to add in your bio description that you are a historian as well, documenting these histories, both real time with the archive, but through your artwork. Thank you so much, Julia, for sharing that. A little fun, few more quick rapid questions before I wrap up. What I was just genuinely curious, how did you come up with your artist name for Kimchi Juice?
Oh my goodness. The real story was I was walking around when I was 15, 16, and I was listening to a song called Korean Jesus by Dumbfounded. And the end of the song, he just says oh, he is forever with me like a kimchi stain on a white t-shirt. And I was thinking about it, I was oh, kimchi juice causes kimchi stains. And I was oh, kimchi juice is a funny name. And then when I started painting murals, usually people don't go by their legal names. They have some artist name. And so I ended up just going with Kimchi Juice because it was the only one in my arsenal. But I think also I'm half Korean, my father's English. So Kimchi Juice kind of sums up the mix that I am, which maybe juice isn't the best representation of whiteness, but kimchi is good for being Korean. And so I'm Kimchi Juice now.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for continuing to pursuing your passion, actually inspiring everyone and helping us remember the history. And so thank you so much for joining us on the show, sharing your story. And for folks, we will put in the chat, in the notes and everywhere, so that way you can know how to follow Julia and learn about all her amazing work. And so we'll definitely put those images for those who haven't got a chance to see her work. So beautiful, so amazing. You should see so many of them in person when you can. And look forward to seeing the next ones, wherever they might be available. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was such a joy.
That was such an inspiring conversation. Thank you, Julie, again for joining us. And I hope you get a chance to check out her work and follow her more. Follow her on Instagram as you hear her inspiring journey and story, and where she continues to capture past and present with her artwork. But for some of us, we're probably wondering, geez, I want to get a chance to also experience and maybe taste Korean culture? And not to worry. Next week, my guest is going to help you with that. And especially for those who like beer, you're in for a treat. Tune in next week to learn how you can connect Korean flavor with beer. This is your host, Monica King, and you're listening to Dear Workplace by Innovators Box. See you next week. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode at Dear Workplace by Innovators Box and your host, Monica King, me. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Today's episode is possible thanks to a wonderful team who has dedicated their time and making sure you hear the quality research that you heard today. Want to shout out to audio engineering and production lead by
Sam Lamert,
audio engineering assistant by
Ravi Ladd,
website and marketing support by
Cree Panday,
graphic support by
Leah Orsini,
Christine Eribal,
original music by Innovators Box Studios, and executive producing, directing, writing, researching, hosted by me, Monica King, founder and CEO of Innovators Box. Thank you so much. Your love and support and sharing means the world to us. Please send us any questions and thoughts you have and what you want to learn more on next. and we'll dive right into it. Thank you and have a wonderful day. See you soon.